Okay. Hello, everyone. As Pam said, things are getting a bit more difficult. No, not getting it more difficult. We're making it so. Let me share my screen, and that's as it should be, right? We are doing the work. Okay. So we're trying this technique out now where we're not doing a slideshow. So I hope the slides are still readable. They will be a bit smaller, I guess. Um, but let me know, please, if they're not readable. Great. Okay. So we will start as usual with a statement about our intention to collaborate to explore the economic principles and tools necessary to move towards regeneration. And we will lean on the collaborative aspect. We will lean on you, you will lean on us to co-create and co-evolve together to find new ways forward. So last week, Pam hosted a fascinating discussion where we started down the path of design. How do we take the principles we have been discussing for the past, I guess, 3 months or so, and move them towards creation of a new process, creation of a new structure, of a new framework, and so on. So we started with tipping points and realized that tipping, which is a natural phenomenon of complex systems, doesn't necessarily imply that we know where we're tipping to. The tipping happens, as happened with the Me Too movement, but the future of the tip, the place it was going to land, was not necessarily designed. So we want to be in a place where we can design where we tip to. We want to know where we're going, or at least to some extent, so that we don't repeat our past mistakes. So Pam highlighted two fundamentals. One is the use of living systems theory, that is complexity science. And second, to trust the process. The idea that the process itself will provide the guardrails and the stepping stones to get us where we need to, which of course then means that we need to be very careful on how we design that process. Yeah. So this week we will begin talking about designing of the process itself. And we're going to start, or I will start today, with looking at the design as it relates to complex systems. We've talked about complex systems having nonlinearities and all these other features that we've talked about again and again, but all of them are relevant and important to include when we design the process itself. So let's start about how we approach a problem. So fixing the potholes, the idea that something doesn't look right, something itches us in the wrong way, we say, fix it. And the way we tend to fix things is say, ask the question. We generally start with the question, what is the problem? Okay, that's fine as a question, as a starting point, but it is not fine as an ending point in terms of designing the solution itself. Because a problem, again, using complexity here, a problem is a problem because of its context. The same thing may not be a problem in a different context. So if we try to fix the problem, we are assuming that the context hasn't changed. So in the case of fixing potholes, I see this all the time in New York. A pothole appears, we fix it. The edges of that pothole are what connect to the context. They are points of vulnerability. They are the first points that start to break once there's stress applied on the pothole. So the next pothole appears in the same place, but it is bigger. So we go on like this until somebody decides it's now time to repave the whole road. Yeah. So this kind of an iteration back and forth, while somewhat necessary in life, but it is also costly and potentially can lead us down to a road where we no longer have the budget. And I don't mean necessarily financial budget, that we no longer have the budget to actually repave the road. So what can we do then? So instead of designing for the problem, designing for the gap, design for future functionality, think about what it is that you want. For in the case of roads, we want a road that is not bumpy. It isn't that we want to fix the pothole. We want a road that is not bumpy. So ask for the future functionality. Look at the design from there and ensure that it's regenerative, meaning that the future functionality isn't being filled at the in the convenience of today, but at the cost of tomorrow. Yeah. So here I bring to your attention my favorite person, Einstein. He talked about how imagination, how knowledge is limited to what we know. And in other words, I can translate that to say, knowledge is limited to context, to the context that we know, that we're familiar with. Imagination is able to go beyond that. So imagination is more important than knowledge. But does that mean we can imagine anything and everything? And then let's go build that? No. What it means is you take your imagination, your imagined future, plug it into the theory of how things work, and then add to it a dollop of belief that, yes, we can achieve it. Yeah. And move forward from there. Now, if you think about it, that's what we're doing here, because here we are, a bunch of non-economists doing economics thinking. So that is what we've been doing here. Wonderful. However, let's become a bit more intentional about it. Let's make the design process more intentional. And that's where we're going now. So then what does a design process become for within a complex system, within a connected universe? What we should start with is what we know. Put everything on the table. Define our terms, define the definitions, define what our scope of knowledge is. Look at the shortcomings of both of what we know and what we have or what we've achieved. Look at the benefits, so they're both a negative and a positive. Put all of that onto the table. And that, by the way, is what we've been doing so far. Then imagine a future. Again, design for functionality. Imagine saying, what if, and in our case, what if we could have an economic system that it wouldn't matter if you earned $100 or 100 million, but you still had the same foothold into the economic framework? Can we do that? So imagine it. Again, put that on the table. Look at living systems theory and say, what parts of this make that possible? And of course, we need to align to it, otherwise we're in deep trouble. Yeah. And finally, once we've created a design, whatever that may be, build a narrative, build a story around it, because it is the story that shows you the future context. It isn't the particular tools or the particular frameworks, because all of that sit inside a context, and the context is best represented through a story. Build the story, show the story, talk about it, sing it, dance it, do whatever is needed to create the message, relay the message, and as Pam has pointed out several times, create a tipping point around the message. Yeah? However, that is still not enough. There's one more thing that's needed, that the process and whatever we design in the future must be adaptable, because we know that our knowledge is limited. We also know that the context is changing. Just because we imagined a future context doesn't mean that's what's going to occur. So both the design, the output, the outcome, as well as the process that got us there, both must be adaptable. So case in point, nature-based solutions were barely heard of a year ago, probably even laughed at. And now that has become a theory of choice. Yeah. But keep in mind that we build from who we are. Yeah. As Einstein pointed out, that we cannot solve a problem by the same mindset that created it. We need different inner skills. We need a way to handle change, to live in change. We need a different way of approaching our problems. And in so doing, in developing those tools, we will be changed ourselves. But we also need to change ourselves in order to have change tools. So we have a dual connection here. Yeah. An example that we're highlighting here is that diversity now is recognized as a major source of innovation, major source of flexibility. However, the structures that we had created previously, the monoculture reliant structures, they were built, they created rigidity, they were built around rigidity. In order to bring diversity to where we are, we need to change our patterns of rigidity, the mental patterns of rigidity. Okay, I wanted to now talk about some of the terms. As we said earlier, define the terms, understand. So let's talk about the theories of complexity as we apply them, as we knit them together into real life, usable things, yeah. So a question came up maybe 2 sessions ago about how do we identify a system? Now, in some cases, a system is obvious. So for example, a human being is one system. Each human being is a system because there's a skin, we can see it, and so on. Look for natural boundaries, but also look for emergent effects. I want to give a little example here. If we look at a family unit, 2 parents and a child, we think of it as a system. So we start with the complexity ideas of porous boundaries, self-organization, all that. I'm just going to focus on 2 here. Porous boundary. The family is communicating outside to society, to school, etc. What is flowing in and out of that porous boundary of the family? 3 times the amount of food, the need for a school, access to school, of course, jobs and other things. But the emergent effect or the emergent properties of the family as a unit, embedded within our socio-economic, ecological context, is that the family now wants to reside where there is a good school. The family now chooses vacations that are family friendly. The family has greater security concerns because there's a child. Then just take that family unit and change the system boundary to an individual. If we think only about the individual and the individual embedded in the same socioeconomic ecological context, the inflows, outflows across that boundary now involve one person's food, no need for a school, its interactions are job related only. The emergent properties that arise and are reflected for this individual, the car insurance rates may be higher because he's an individual, not part of a family. More discretionary funds so that the society around this individual may now contain more entertainment related activities. The grocery stores or the supermarkets may have more entertainment related products because there's more discretionary funds available. And potentially there might be other entertainment types available that have a higher risk type. So that's a way to apply complex system thinking, to understand systems and how just the way we view a system, the way we choose to define a system, can change the way we design the context, we design the system effects. That's probably the right word, system effects. And I want to talk about another one. So we're just going to talk about 2 today. The other is about scaling. The word scale is so important, especially in the climate change world. But what does it mean to scale? So an example could be, there's a natural disaster as current hurricane in the United States. If we donate $1 million, but we want to scale up because the size of the disaster is very large. So if we take the 1 million and we give them 10 million, so that's a 10x scaling up of the input of the intervention. Will we get a 10x effect? Why not? Because the system needs to be able to accommodate, to absorb, to metabolize the intervention. As we've said before, every system chooses its response based on its internal structures, its abilities. So if the system is unable to digest the intervention, then that intervention becomes degenerative. It creates a degenerative effect. We have already seen this in the hurricane of, I think it was Puerto Rico, 5-10 years ago, where the public was extremely generous. There was a campaign to donate $1 via Twitter. Every time you tweeted something, there'd be a $1 donation. I believe that the total value of the donation reached $1 billion. But the majority of that, like 90% of that, has disappeared. Nobody knows where it has gone to. We know for definitely when something disappears, becomes non-transparent, no good can come of that. That huge amount of money is now in the underground. Yeah. And another example I give, this is a bit more obvious. We've been digging wells for water shortage. Fine. Should we dig lots of wells? But what is the combined effect of that? Can the earth handle, can the earth's water system handle such large amounts of wells? So we need to understand that the actual effect comes through, is mediated through the internal metabolism of the system, the ability to digest, to accommodate, to work with the intervention. The effect does not come from merely applying the input. So then the definition of scaling changes completely. We then ask, how much and what can we apply with what frequency such that the system under question can uptake what we have applied? It's a total different way of approaching the problem. So then what we would do if the problem is very large is we would apply an intervention, allow it to be digested, apply another intervention of potentially of a different kind. And then take the system, you could say grow the system, or you might even say learn the system into health. Yeah. So we come to the final discussion prompt. How can we align ourselves better to the natural living systems principles such that we can create a healthy and sustainable form of the economic system and society? Thank you.
Thank you, Tanuja. That prompt leads right in, Catherine, to your desire to ponder what a connected example might be. So in the feed, Catherine pointed out that the example, and it was, of course, an example we thought people could relate to, because you have to start with being relational. But what might be another example, the family unit and the individual unit, that would be connected? So do you want to clarify that a bit, Catherine? And let's ponder that together.
So what excuse me, what I'm seeing everywhere, and it's It's just really interesting. I woke up this morning thinking about human rights. And when we think of human rights, we think of them in a separated way. An individual has autonomy, has the right to autonomy. We feel that there's so much credence given to what an individual wants, and there's no real understanding of that individual's seating in the whole and the responsibility for that. So we're fighting for this separateness when what we really need is to be fighting for connection. And we're just so strongly embedded in that separateness. So it's really hard to understand. And I think the resistance to that is, oh crap, then we have to get rid of civilization. We have to go back to living on the land. And I think there's a resistance to thinking about that. And I'm not sure that that's a healthy resistance. I do think that we may feel and discover that so much of what we've created has to go because it is killing our world, frankly, because we're separate and we're not. And so every step that we take to institutionalize that separation is a step toward killing the planet, basically.
Great.
So
Yeah.
if we were going to think about the family as a connected piece, what would the family need and what would an individual need? And how would that look in a connected world? I keep going back to the story of the Peruvian village, which I think I've shared here before, and the natural affinity we have to helping others. When we see someone in stress, we just want to reach out. There's a natural desire to do that. And how we have designed a world to make that really, really hard or even impossible. We have all these things we tell ourselves about why we should not do that, how we're interfering with their right to fail and die, basically. Because they're autonomous and they should have the right to make their own choices. And we have all this rationale. So how do we reframe that discussion, that thinking in a way that is starting to be inclusive and connected?
Catherine,
Yeah.
when you said that the example was not about connectedness, or maybe you said separate from the natural world, even the individual, even a so-called autonomous individual, is connected. He or she is connected through everything, through the needs, through the earth, through the job, through what they want, what they do. They're just different types of connections. There's the relationship to Mother Earth, so that's the natural one. There's the one related to other human beings. There's the relationship to our buying and selling of products, all of which are relationships. And because they are relationships, there are emergent effects. Now, while I agree with you that our laws and all that are really about separateness, I agree, because we broke the relationships. All of our theories are based on breaking relationships. I agree with all that. But the reality is that we're connected. So, yeah, does that make sense? And so I agree also that we need to reword our laws, reword our priorities. I agree with that. I learned recently there's a law called the Good Samaritan Law, where if you go in and help somebody who's in distress, and as a result of your assistance, the person is caused more harm, but you're not liable because you were giving your assistance as a good Samaritan. So I thought that was a really good way of of supporting relationships from a legal perspective?
Why
You
would
know,
we
I,
need a law to support relationships, though? I mean, that's
Well,
sort I
well,
mean, my
well,
father
remember,
once said you can't legislate morality. And we keep trying to do that because we don't have the relationships that actually support it. And so we're doing it from the outside. I think,
because
that,
again, we're
you know
I
what,
mean,
I'm gonna interject here, you guys, because I think that we can get far afield, and both of you I really agree with, but what I wrote and what I think is important is that separateness and individuality is born from a social compact that we entered into together. And we entered into that when the ships, I'm just going to start there. It did already happen, but when the King of England gave a duke all the land in North Carolina, John Locke wrote a constitution for that country. And that John Locke's Constitution for the country of North Carolina became the foundational document for the Constitution of the United States of America. And uppermost in it was property rights, private property rights for the landowners. And that is where this individualism really started sprouting, and much of our social compact came from that. So I think that we're very far afield from the natural way of things. I completely agree. But rather than the little arguments over semantics, I do want to lead us back to to the larger question, which is, Catherine, creating a nature-based connected system. Absolutely. I don't think anyone needs to argue how far off we are currently. We're way off the mark. So absolutely, I look forward to building that together. Eric.
I found this particular introduction really stimulating. I made 4 different notes on 4 different areas of the presentation, but I won't go through all of those, or I should not go through all of those anyway, because it's just my shot. I think maybe the one that sits at the top, or alternatively at the base of my observation, is that as we work towards a nature-based system and a nature-based economy, we have at some point, there's an intervention of presumption, right? Like, we all agree we want this, but there seems a gap. And I know the details have been presented by various very smart people, very passionate people over a fairly recent set of years, arguing for that. But here's the thing. I also teach design, and one of the things that I try to get my students to sort of relentlessly come back to is what I call first principles. And in this sense of first principles, I don't know that we've answered with clarity the question of what does an economic system actually need to deliver to us?
No, we haven't yet.
And therefore, how do we design if we don't know what it needs to provide? And my observation of that is, it is like so many other things, but particularly potent, is this is a tool, right? An economic system in a broadest sense is a tool, and we've deified it, right? We've made it into our God. And therein sits a lot of the confusion. So I'll be quiet now. Maybe I'll come up to the other 3 when it's appropriate.
So Eric, to your question, very appropriate that we don't know what economic systems we want to have, but that's why we're trying to come up with a process so that we can lean on the process. Yeah, we
Yeah, but
know that we don't know.
the question still sits out there of applying a process to an unanswered set of deliverables, I suppose.
Yeah, and okay, so last week I did take a stab at it, and just as a starter, by going back to the original definition of what the word economics means, and it's the management of the household. So when you have Christiana gave an incredible example of in the hunter-gatherer times, the hunter went out, killed an animal to feed the village, brought it back, and a woman in the village with status cut up the meat, and the first best piece went to the hunter himself. The second best piece went to the matriarch of the community, who everyone understood to be the mother of making it all happen. And then the rest of the animal was distributed, and the skin and everything was used to sustain the whole community through an equitable set of decision-making principles. So an economy, the management of the household, the perpetuation of keeping the household, in this case defined as the entire community, alive and moving forward, was the definition of economics. And I love that as a starting first principle for we naturally, one of our main drives in life is perpetuating the species, keeping us from dying off. And so if we think of an economic system as perpetuating the species, how do we not kill ourselves off?
I'd say that for me, well, first off, let me just say, I don't know if I'm quibbling, tinkering around the edges of something, or whether I've put my finger on something that's quite essential.
Okay.
With this question, I do remember that. I remember that presentation. I remember that really moving explanation. I will note that there are societies out there where the hunter does not get to eat the meat at all because of their particular social norms. It would be highly presumptuous to the deities, to nature, to the animal itself and the community, were that hunter to eat what he or she shot. They would depend on someone else bringing their kill to their hearth. So there are options in there, but that's really neither here nor there. But what you have described, I would say, is a second principle. And the first principle is what you said at the very end. The first principle is perpetuation of the species. From there, we would move up and say, okay, what is needed to perpetuate our species? And of course, it's not just physical, right? It's not just biological, it's social. And that's where all the empathy and the caring and the nurturing and these sorts of things come in in a cohesive way to hold the band together. That becomes more of kind of like the second principle. So that's just to clarify.
Sure, I agree with you. I absolutely agree. What was going on there was perpetuating the species. I absolutely agree that just doing it in a way that added.
But this is what we do, right? We grab on something that's really familiar to the extent that we no longer even question or think about it, what it does, and we go, that's it. That's the kernel. That's the basis of everything. Of course, it's a no-brainer. If you can't eat, you die. If you don't bring food to the community, everybody dies. But if you're really going to look at a question of first principle, and for me, that kind of comes into this whole thing about like, what does the economic system actually need to provide? And so if you look at the first principles of that, it may not be that kind of a system. There may be options. There may be alternatives to something that we now call an economic system. I'm just being agnostic about that for the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want it to be wide open, and I do want to get to Jessica because she's been waiting with her hand up patiently. Are you there, Jessica?
I'm here. I'm going to take things in a little bit direction, although I'm enjoying this dialogue. One of the questions I've been really exploring around design is sort of the relationship to time, or the temporal aspect. So in other words, building through, thinking about living principles. Does it still apply if, only one principle is met, for example, if say we're working towards 7 or 8? What if, and just to take one example, in the case of a business, if there is a regenerative business practice or operation underway, but then it's acquired and things go terribly south and it's definitely no longer regenerative anymore. Of course, we're building through the lens of things will change, systems, are unpredictable. So I'm kind of posing this question of how do we think about time and how that in and of itself makes the system unstable, or at least our ability to predict or build for future function, and how that characterizes or challenges regenerative design.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think nature has a solution for that. It works with the current reality. It works with what's right in front of it. It reorganizes itself to meet the moment, and that just happens continuously. So I think while it's interesting, that one I think is we can count on finding answers as we need them if we're working within a regenerative, natural way. Trust the process. That was one of our fundamentals. So, all right. Catherine, do you have and thought regarding this first principle? And then Tanuja, you question perpetuation of the species as a first principle. What does that mean? Tell me. Tell us.
I take the term perpetuation of the species, meaning something different than I'm here and I don't want someone to shoot me dead, which is survival of me, which is different than perpetuation, which is me producing children.
Oh,
yeah. So I separate the two things. So, no, you don't, Eric? You don't separate the two?
No, I separate them, but I'm also quite willing to support somebody else as a non-procreational partner, in child rearing on a community level. So it's perpetuating my species could also include just being a really good uncle, for instance. I don't need to produce children.
Yeah. Okay, so just back to the Asian perspective, just to put it on the table as we decided. The Asian perspective is that we are all evolving through the creative expression of who we are. That evolution ultimately leads to oneness called enlightenment.
mm-hmm.
And so the perpetuation of the species, my producing children, is for the purpose for us as a community to move towards enlightenment. It may not happen through me, it may not even happen through my children, but it may happen through my neighbor's children. So our goal is reaching that highest point. Producing children is just one of the tools.
Okay, so you're applying meaning to life.
Well, here's the thing. If we are saying that evolution is creative expression, not merely continuing the body. then meaning is embedded in our survival. Meaning is part of why we are born.
Well,
I don't
what,
need to
but
describe
that
meaning.
makes us separate from other animals. Like,
No,
so
no,
I'm
no, I
talking
don't think
about
so.
if there's a spider going across my floor and I move in on that spider because I want to move him outside. So he's not in my home. He's living in nature. He will run from me, afraid for his life, in the fear that I am going to hurt him. Even though I'm only trying to scoop him up to get him outside, I do risk hurting him, actually. If I'm not really careful about it, I can break his leg. And so I will, oh, Jessica had to go.
Do you talk to him, Pam? Because that's what I do. I find that if I tell the spider I'm going to
Okay.
make his life better,
Okay,
that he actually will not run, but will
okay,
wait.
good tip. I will try
So
that.
it's that connection that makes the difference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I had not evolved to the point that I had thought to actually, I won't tell you what all I do, but talking to the spider and calming their fear, I had not done. But the point is that spider is not seeking, that I'm aware of, enlightenment. There is a natural, innate desire to not die. And so I think getting down to really first principles is the definition of that term, is the way I was using it. That a natural, living, sentient being on the planet seems to have an immediate reaction to potential loss of life by trying to not be killed. And so that is just sort of the basis definition. Yeah. I don't disagree with you at all, Tanuja. There may be enlightenment. I don't know for sure, and I don't believe anybody has nailed what it is, but I don't discount that potential. But to go with the natural principles, can we agree that any sentient being seems to fight to hold on to and perpetuate their species?
The prime directive in my work is that all actions create the conditions that support life. So that's the key. If we work from that first principle, that we're supporting life in some way, that everything we do supports life, makes it healthier, richer, more vibrant, thriving, then I think whatever we do is fine. But if we don't have that understanding, we tend to undercut that possibility. And we're very good at that. That's what we've been focused on, actually.
The trouble with saying supporting life is we're trying to say we are anti-death. And I don't think you are. I don't think that's what you mean.
No, but that's how we act, is anti-death. And we think that anti-death is pro-life, and it's not. I mean, we're so entitled. We cannot die. We will kill whatever tries to kill us. And we have built our whole society on that.
Right.
You know, that somehow we are outside of death and we should not die. And in so doing, we're killing everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a true statement. that is, no argument at all. Yeah. in a timely manner, though. I think that that I back to defining an economic system, defining the purpose and point of why we organize. I think that it sounds like everybody agrees that life perpetuation is a first principle in
Not interfering with that would be like the basic. But when we think about being regenerative, then it is actually to support it to thrive,
Yes,
which I think is a better space.
that's right. It's
okay
not
for its
survival,
life
it's thriving.
cycle, not
It's
forever.
not survival.
It's
Yeah.
just for its life cycle, right? Not ad nauseum.
Ad nauseam.
No, life is forever. I think that's
I'm
one
saying
of
that right now
An
we
individual
try
life.
to keep the individual alive
That's right.
into too long.
Yeah, well, when we get caught in the confusion between being alive and life, then we do that.
Okay,
There's
fair
a
enough.
difference. There's a difference.
Fair, yeah, yes, life, not being alive. But
Yes.
we're not driven to save life. Which what you just said, we're willing to kill all kinds of things to keep ourselves alive.
But that's different. That's part of nature. But if you only kill to eat, we would be fine. But we kill for the pleasure of it. We kill, so that maybe other people could at some point eat. I mean, the amount of death that we generate in the grocery store is way beyond what we need. Way beyond what we need.
Right.
So
I couldn't agree
we
with you
just
more.
kill. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I mean, killing, it's not about killing. It's the responsibility that's inherent in that we're totally not generating.
Yeah.
So Eric, actually talking about first principles, I thought, because as you say,
Yes.
economic system is a tool. I do have to go, as I mentioned in the chat, and I have to take this meeting with me. I'm sorry about that. It's not just
That's
me
right.
having to go. Apologies. So Eric, your question, you pointed out the economic system is something we created. It's not nature created it. It's a tool we created for ourselves. That's fine. So I think our first principle, our first question should be, why do we need this tool? I don't think it has anything to do with survival. It has to do with facilitation of the management of the household. That should be our first question. Yeah.
Okay, so let's hold that. Oh, Eric, do you have a reply, sir?
I have one thing, because I was about to write that I need to jump on the next call, but before I go, the first note that I wrote had to do with the potholes. And I think this brings us back around to that question of like, why do we need this tool? Which was, it was a really great explanation of how potholes evolve. And at some point you decide to repave the road. And my curiosity, my question from that moment was, how often is appropriate to re-ask what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a stack of assumptions, each one of which bred the next one. It says we need a paved, smooth road. And maybe that's not the best answer now for getting from here to there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And maybe we don't need roads.
But that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So here's the opportunities to question those presumptions, which just lead to cities spending money on asphalt. And I would say that is similar in our kind of probing of this economic system or household economy, right? It still comes back to, for me, a desire to question what it is that we want from it as a system.
Right.
And I'm going to have to leave You're going to have to leave it.
Yes,
Tangent.
me too. Thank you
Okay,
very much,
see you next
folks.
week,
Maybe we
everybody.
Next
want
week.
life from
Thanks.
that system.
Thanks.
Maybe that's what we want.
To be continued.